Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the B&W base rails with custom installation kit on a 2020 Ford F-250. If you're looking to put a fifth wheel in your F-250, B&W is the base rail kit that I would choose to put in my own F-250. And the reason being is B&W's kits are very well made, all of the hardware is great, and so are the instructions. And not to say that other brands aren't as good as B&W, I just learned that the consistency of quality really shines through with B&W. And really at the end of the day, you're just trying to get base rails onto your truck to allow you to get a fifth wheel in place, and they all follow an ISR standard, which basically means whatever brand fifth wheel you have, you'll see that there's quite a bit of spots for adjustment to be able to account for a good majority of them. So most of them will fit into these rails. And to get these mounted up, you're basically going to the frame and bolting things in. And this kit is great. It is well designed to where it uses factory holes. There's really no drilling required on the kit except for the holes to put the carriage bolts through to mount up the rails. But the rest of it follows factory spots. And overall, it's not a very hard installation to do, especially the Fords are a little bit easier than some of the other brands as far as spacing. B&W also looks really nice. Not only can you see the side brackets on the frame rail, but also these rails will have the gray color that's kind of the B&W signature, and it looks really sharp in the bed. And also when you have your fifth wheel out of the bed and not towing, it really doesn't take up a whole lot of extra space. It's going to stick up, a little bit over the corrugation, but it's not going to stop you from putting 2x4s or drywall or whatever you want to in the back of your bed. It doesn't take that much space up. And then whenever you're ready to put your fifth wheel in, it should just drop right into place. You'll pin it in and you're ready to go. So as I mentioned, it's a custom installation kit that's designed for the F-250. It's going to use all those spots and makes it really easy. And so if you're doing this at home, you can definitely do this in your driveway or garage. I would give yourself, maybe 4 or 5 hours at most to really tackle this. There's nothing that's going to be too surprising on here. Just take your time measuring out because that's really going to determine the rest of the installation for you. Now, follow along with the video and I'll make sure you get it installed. But if you decide that maybe this is beyond your scope, you don't have the place to do it, the tools to do it, or maybe even the want to do it, you can use our dealer locator to find someone close to you to get these rails installed. But DIYers, follow along. Let's get your rails installed. First thing we're going to want to do once you get all your hardware laid out is grab your rails as well as your side brackets and the tape that's included. And the reason being that we're going to be putting this on our rails as well as those brackets is because of dissimilar metals. You don't want to have steel against aluminum, which a lot of the Ford trucks now use, and that can cause corrosion long term, and this is going to create a nice barrier. So we'll apply 4 strips total on each rail. And then we're going to also put some strips on the outside of our brackets. So we'll just start by putting it on the outside edge. I'm just going to follow the carriage bolt openings and just kind of line it up with that and then roll our tape all the way across. And then we're just going to repeat the same step that we did on that side to the remaining other side of the rail, and then we'll do the other rail as well. So with the tape on our rails on our brackets, we're going to put it on the outside flange. So where this points out, we're going to just run it along this edge. And as we do the installation, we're going to have quite a bit of spacers and blocks that we're going to be using, and we may want to put some on as we install it. Anywhere where it's going to make contact with the bed, we'll be putting that tape in place. So keep that tape handy, and we'll keep that in mind when we're getting the installation going. Looking at the instructions, they have us measuring out from the rear where the end of the bed is to a mark that's going to be 29 3/8. But we have a spray-in bed liner, and generally that adds about 1/8 of an inch. So for our purposes, we'll add that 1/8 of an inch on, and it's going to make it 29.5. So I have a chalk marker here. You can use anything to make a mark in your bed. The chalk markers are nice because if you goober it up, you don't have paint to worry about. It just comes off with water. So measuring from the back, just make sure that you have your measuring tape nice and flat against that spot. And I'm going to make 2 reference marks, one on each side, just kind of evenly spaced out, and that way we can get the rail line nice and straight. So with those measurements, I'll just take the rail and it's going to go to this edge towards the rear of the truck. Now's a good time to kind of center it up too. So your center holes should sit in this corrugation pretty well straight, but just to make sure that we have it all properly in place, I'm going to measure from the wheel well to the edge of the rail on both sides. That way it's nice and even. So we're at right about 3 5/8 and about 3 7/8. So I'll bump this over a bit. And just get this all dialed in. 3/4 there. Let's do that. 3 3/4, yeah. Now I got all my measurements made, and what I like to do is make more reference marks because we'll be drilling out holes and moving the rail around, and it's really nice to have that visual mark to be able to drop this directly back in. So what I like to do is just on the back side, just kind of run along the rails on a few corrugations here, and then you can also do it on this edge just to make sure it's all properly aligned. We're also going to make some drill marks, and this one in particular, it's important. You can see these are ISR rails, so they're meant for a bunch of different trucks, but we need to follow a specific pattern on here. So it's going to be the outside holes, and just center that up as much as possible with your marking pen. And I'm going to come back with a punch, so if you have a punch, feel free, you can use that as well. We're going to be using both of the center marks, and then also the outside again. Now we can move our rail. And then with our center punch, it may not make a huge difference here on the bed liner. Sometimes it really doesn't make a huge dimple for you to get started, but the main thing is knowing that you have those marks made, and then with an 1/8 inch drill bit, we're going to go ahead and drill out all 6 of those holes. Now, if you have metal shavings or pieces of the bed liner, don't worry, we're going to be coming back and enlarging these holes. These are mostly just a visual reference to when we put our side plates on, we can determine if it's all properly aligned. So we'll leave it like this, and now we can head underneath the truck. And something I might recommend, if you have a spare tire, I would lower that down. It's going to make it a lot easier and give you a little bit more real estate to work underneath the truck. It's probably possible without lowering it down and removing it, but it seems to make it a lot easier for the installation. Also recommend getting your heat shield out of the way, again, just to make space for us to get everything mounted up. This is just 3 13mm bolts. You'll have 1 here and then 2 on the back side to get this removed. Now at this point, we're going to grab our side rails, and they are specific to each side. One will have a D and one will have a P, obviously driver and passenger. And what we're going to do is raise this up into place, and the driver side bracket, you'll have one side that has 2 mounting holes that will sit against the bed. On the back side though, where we've made our small drill, we only have 1. So what we'll do is we'll raise this up, make sure that the hole is nice and square, and we're also looking for the hole in the frame to align with our bracket. So just make sure everything looks all squared up, and if you need to, you can always adjust the holes that you drilled, but if you did your measurements properly, you should be just fine. Now we're going to want to enlarge the holes with a 9/16 drill bit. If you don't have a 9/16, you can get away. I have a 1/2 inch here and a burr bit. But what I like to do is have one of the carriage bolts ready, because this is what we're going to be passing through the hole. So making sure that it's nice and clean for this to drop in is definitely going to be important. Now, the outside holes as well as the rear hole in the center, we're going to just drill out. But this forwardmost one has the bed corrugation in place. So it's going to get a little bit different here. And when you drill this one out, you're going to go through the bed, and then you're also going to be drilling through the corrugation. So you may need a pretty long drill bit. Just make sure that it's as straight as possible when you do that, and then we'll come back and enlarge that. But for now, let's get all of our 9/16 drilled out. With those all enlarged, my carriage bolt passes in nice and easy. And on this back one, I mentioned that we're going to enlarge it to 7/8, and that's because we're going to drop this in. So it's important to only enlarge the bed portion. I've drilled straight through with that 9/16, but with the step bit, I'm going to enlarge this to 7/8 for this to drop in place, and that's going to become a nice structural point for when we tighten down the hardware on the rail to not crush the corrugation. So I'm going to get this drilled out. And then this should just slide in place like that. We'll get all of our metal shavings vacuumed up. Now we're going to get those frame brackets put back in place, and we're going to be getting them mounted up to the frame using our large bolts. We have the large flat washer. We'll pass this from the outside in once it's aligned, and then we're going to finish it up with a flat washer, a split washer, and then the nut. Now it's important to check, if your truck is the same year that we're doing, then it's going to be exactly the same, but it also accounts for newer years, so it can change. So just double check to make sure that you're following the proper one for your year span. And the driver's side is going to be slightly different than the passenger, so I'll get this bolted up and then I'll show you the difference there. And when putting this in place, we're just going to loosely put it in for now. We don't need to tighten it, but just get it started. On the passenger side, I mentioned it's a little bit different. You can put the rearmost one in to hold it up, and then you're going to want to grab this spacer. It's offset here, and it's got a rounded edge on two corners and then a pointed edge. So this just drops into place. Just make sure you're aligning it with that hole. And then we're going to use the large spacer block that we have here, or washer plate, and we're going to pass our bolt through here. No large flat washer necessary because this is going to take the place of that. And then as far as the back side, we're going to use that same washer, split washer, nut combo. Now the passenger side is a little bit different, and it's really not too terrible. You can get the rearmost bolt in place to hold that in, and then we're going to use this offset spacer that's going to go into this portion. Just make sure you have that slotted portion towards the hole. It can really only go, you'll see the pointed and rounded edges, so that should align. And then instead of using the flat washer, we're going to be using this washer plate to pass this through. So just get that aligned, we'll raise this up, and then with that in place, we'll just get the same hardware combination on the back side. Now we'll take our rail and we're going to position it back in place. And as far as hardware goes, if you haven't already dropped that spacer in that corrugation, you can go ahead and do that. So with our hardware combination, to get this in place loosely, we'll take the two bolts included with a split washer, and these are going to go onto this portion, and this is also going into corrugation, but we have a weld nut that's on a plate that we'll be putting in once we get down below. And they have you do this step first, but while we're here, instead of having to go up and down in the truck, I'm just going to get everything in place. So on the rearmost holes, those are just going to be our carriage bolts that look like this. And sometimes your powder coat will be a little bit built up to where this doesn't want to pop in. If you just push that down, or you can hit it with a dead blow, a lot of times that'll drop it into place. And now's a good time to also check to make sure all your holes are aligned pretty well too, because if it's not aligning, you may have to enlarge that. And then on the rear hole here, we're going to have a normal carriage bolt as well. But we do have this U-shaped spacer, and that's going to close up that corrugation gap to where it's not going to crush the bed as we tighten it down. Now they do recommend putting in that same tape that we put on our rail. We have a bed liner in place here, so really don't have to worry about that. If you are just raw metal, I would recommend putting that tape in place there. And then on the back one, we also have that U-shaped bolt, but the longer carriage bolt is going to go through here. So get that in place. And now we can head underneath and get everything attached. The bolts that we passed down with that split washer, we're going to be using the tool that's included with our kit, as well as these spacers with the nut welded on. And we're going to place it with the spacer towards the front and the nut portion dropping in. And this is going to feed into the corrugation, and as we tighten that bolt down, it's going to thread in, so it may become a two-person job. I think in the instructions they might have had you do this first to see if you could thread it in. You could probably still hop up and get that threaded in, no problem. But to gain access to the corrugation, if you have wheel well liners, you are going to want to peel this back to be able to gain access to them. So it's going to be in this little U shape on our bracket. Right above that, there's this plastic push pin, and I think we can pop this out. I think it's just a Christmas tree style, but this is going to help us peel back that wheel well liner and get full access. And with my trim panel tool, this is pretty large, not exactly easy to pop off, so you may have to go on the back side and do this, or potentially just find something to wedge and kind of pry back to get this to pop out. So just take your time here. I finally got one removed, and it is just a very thick Christmas tree style plastic plug. And what I ended up doing is, once I got it kind of pulled out far enough, I peeled back the wheel well liner and then just wedged this and just kind of popped it out. It did take a little bit of force in order to get this. If you don't want to struggle with that, you could possibly drill this out or cut it out or whatever, but getting it back into place may be the issue. So I was able to get it out. You will probably struggle with it, so do your best and take your time. If you don't have wheel well liners, you're definitely in luck. To give ourselves a little bit more room, I'm going to remove this small screw. It's going to be a 7mm socket to accomplish that, and it's just going to open it up to where we can really get a little bit more space to get our spacer block, our threaded one, in place. So I'm able to peel this back, and if you look up in the corrugation, that bolt thread doesn't stick down a ton, and it's in an uprise part of the corrugation. So what we'll need to do with our tool is put a little bit of a bend here to where it's going to sit nice and flat. I don't think it should take too much to bend here, but I think at this angle we can adjust as necessary. But we're going to raise this in place and just get that spacer around the bolt, and then I'm going to have a friend hop in the bed and just get a few threads started, and that way it'll hold this all in place, and then we can move to the other side. Now this is going to be hard for us to show you at home exactly how it's going to go, but I did get the one side started. I have Sam in the bed of the truck. He's starting the bolts as I hold this up, and since it's tucked up there, you really want to just kind of put this under and then get that bolt here and then push up. But this angle, or roughly about this angle, should get you started. And once you kind of get those threads going, just make sure you get it engaged, and then you'll be good. We need to get the carriage bolts that we passed down in place, and so we'll be using this offset spacer block, and because it's going to be resting against the bed, we are going to use some of that tape again just to prevent that metal on metal contact, and it's going to be exactly the same hardware combination on most of them. So we'll start on these ones here. So we'll just take that offset block, put that in place. We then have a flat washer, a split washer, and then our nut. Now sometimes that bolt can pass up, and so if you need to, you can have someone push down or just use the block to kind of hold those threads in place just to get this started. And we're going to be doing the same for the one that's in the rear as well as the other two that weren't in the corrugation. But something that we're going to see is on our ones that are on the outside here, there's a gap, and so on the back ones we are going to be putting these blocks in place, and we're going to be taping those in. So those are going to go in between the bracket and the bed, and then the hardware combination will go underneath the bracket, and it's going to be exactly the same as these. So we'll get them all started. You may find it hard to get all of that hardware started because it starts to stack it up pretty good. So make sure that your carriage bolts are seated properly. If you need to, you can get that dead blow to knock them in. Push up on the bracket also to get as much as you can. And then if you have to absolutely do it, you can get rid of that flat washer. And being that we have a spray-in bed liner, if you have one, I will say it did get pretty tight here. I was able to get it all in place, and once we tighten down, it should be fine. But if you need to get it started, you can get that flat washer taken off. Now to position our forward rail, we're going to need the base of the fifth wheel that we'll be using. So put that into our rear rail, and you can pin that in place, and then we're going to just drop the connection of our fifth wheel into the front rail. And because this is industry standard, they should all be roughly about the same size, but this makes sure that we have tolerances between manufacturers to make sure that it works properly. So using this will get us there, but we do want to make sure that we're pushing all the way back on our back, and then on the front, pull this forward. So a lot of times what I'll do is just kind of fight these here and push our rail as far forward as possible, and then making sure that we have our base pushed back. And sometimes it does help if you want to pin this in just to make sure it'll drop in, but this should be pretty well in line with our other rail. So give it a quick check, make sure it's all squared up properly, and then we can mark out where we're going to drill. Now in our configuration, we're going to be using those same outside holes, so we can mark those. But when we get to the center, it's only going to be the one that's towards the cab. So just make sure that you're only marking this one out. And then it's going to be a similar process as we did before. There's not going to be that spacer tube to go in place here, so we're just going to drill these out with that 9/16 and make sure that our carriage bolts pass through. And just as before, I'm going to start with the pilot hole, and that way we can double check to make sure everything's aligned, and also it's not going to be walking on me as much as a large drill bit. So we'll get this drilled out first, and then we'll come back and enlarge it, assuming that everything's lined up properly. Then we're just going to do the same process as we did before. So just drop your carriage bolts in. And then when we get to this center one, just remember, we'll put that U-shaped spacer block in here, but if you don't have a bed liner, make sure that you're putting that tape on there. Before you head underneath the truck again, you can go ahead and get that fifth wheel dropped in, and then we'll just make sure that we're, again, pushing back on the base and then pulling this forward as much as possible. So getting our hardware in place, pretty easy. Obviously we get same here in the center as we did before. Now the U-shaped spacers, when we put those on the side, the best way I found is if you go from the inside and then slide that towards the bolt, there's enough of a gap between the frame and the bed to be able to get those in place nice and easy. And then the rest of it is just going to be that same combination of the flat washer, lock washer, and nut. So we'll get these all hand tightened in place. With all of our hardware in place, now it's time to tighten and torque it down. So I'm going to just take my torque wrench. A lot of these are hand tightened on, so it's not going to take a whole lot to get these torqued to spec. And your instruction manual is going to have the torque settings necessary. And first we're going to start with the 1/2" hardware. So that's going to be all the carriage bolts that we passed down and also the ones up top that went into those blocks. So we need to make sure that we're getting those dialed in. They are a lower torque setting than our larger bolts, and we'll do those secondary. But we'll need a 3/4 inch socket to get all the 1/2" ones tightened down. Now for our larger hardware, we're going to be using a 15/16 socket, and you may need a 15/16 wrench so it doesn't spin on you as you're torquing it down. And this is pretty significantly higher than our last one, so you're going to want a 1/2" torque wrench. And if I didn't mention before, if you need a torque wrench, we have these available here at eTrailer. You can generally go to an auto parts store and rent one for free, but this is definitely going to be important, especially for the amount of weight that you're probably going to be loading up on your fifth wheel. You want to make sure that all your hardware is nice and tight to hold up long term. And this is going to make sure that it's going to be tight enough, but also not too tight, putting stress on any of the hardware. So I'll go through and get all of our larger bolts properly torqued. And with my wrench kind of perched on the leaf springs, that's going to make it a lot easier to get our torque set up. Now with everything torqued down properly, we can get our heat shield as well as our spare tire put back in place. And really, we just need to pin up our fifth wheel, and then we'll be ready to hit the road. Now I have everything put back together, but something that's going to bother me and really not going to cause a whole lot of issue is this side plate rotated as I was tightening, and it is going to keep that spacer block in place. Functionally, it's totally okay, but this is something you can see from the side of your truck, and it's something that's going to bother me. So I'm going to go back and just get this straightened up and then torque that down. And that was a look and installation of the B&W fifth wheel base rails with custom installation kit on a 2020 Ford F-250.